hear myself talking on the video indicator, but no one is yet online. We're nearly there. It's nearly 4 o'clock. No, what am I doing? 5 o'clock. And there's nobody there yet. Looks like something is not working right, but I don't know if that's it. That's the case. I'm trying to stream. I wonder if there's something I haven't done yet. Have we got any messages? Has anybody sent any messages yet? No, hello and welcome, that's me. Anybody there yet? Hello, talk to me, please. Well, it's 5 o'clock, and according to this, I haven't got anybody watching, which is, so it sounds as if there's something going wrong here. I wonder what. I wonder what. Oh, something's happened. No, it hasn't. That was me talking to myself. A message came through from me. Right, okay. Well, we're not doing too well. How do I know what's gone wrong? If I start a new window, and put it over there, I could type in the URL of the thing and see if it is reporting anything. So if I pop that in there, what do I get? I get YouTube saying, oh, well, it looks as if it should be online. So, there's a message. Laura Scott, I can see and hear, but I don't know how to chat in the chat box. Oh, so Laura Scott is the lady who has asked the one question, a superb question. So you can see and hear me. Okay, right. Thank you, Laura. But according to the YouTube's analytics, there isn't anybody there, but I'm just going to hope that there is somebody there and get started and see what happens. Good. Okay. Right. Well, so it says there's nobody there, but I'm hoping that there might be somebody there. So if I keep my eyes... John Ingemels is there. Good. Okay. Right. Well, so obviously the stats on the YouTube window are not telling the truth in terms of watching now. It says nobody is watching. Okay, one person did come on at about 4 minutes to and then disappeared again. So anyway, right, I'll assume there are some at least somebody. Well, I know there's at least John and Laura listening to me. That's great. Thank you. Well, thank you for that vote of confidence. Right, okay, so let's get started. Right, I'm starting by asking the question, who am I? Just in case there's anybody out there who doesn't know me. John certainly does. He was my beautiful assistant when I did my last training session with SFEP. So I'm an editor, yes, but I'm also an obsessive problem solver, which is why I've generated so many macros. I do sometimes get called a macro maniac or Mr. Macros. And I thought you'd be amused. John likes me to tell jokes. Well, it's not a joke, but when I was invited to go to Spain a few years ago to talk about macros. I wondered how they had introduced me on their website, and I found it was Señor de las Macros. And so if I launch that into Google Translate, you will see that it says I am the Lord of the Macros.
Lord of the Macros.
So that's your little laugh, but the only slight snag is that I don't know whether there's anybody laughing, which is a bit disconcerting. But anyway, we'll carry on. Okay, I thought it might also help, if there is anybody listening, to give you an idea of where I come from and why it is that I've produced so many macros and I seem to be sort of in the lead in producing macros, because I do have a big history. I've been a freelance editor since 2005-06, so about 13-14 years, but before that I spent 20 years as an editor. I had my own magazine, and I was the owner, editor, typesetter, proofreader, the whole lot for those 20 years. And while I was doing that, probably around 10 years in, having to do each month some regular global find and replaces, I'd made a list on paper of all the changes so I didn't forget any of them. And then I started thinking, well, couldn't a computer do this? Couldn't I give the list to a computer? Surely somebody could write a computer program. And someone in the area that I used to work, which was the Acorn Computers fraternity, an Acorn computer person wrote just such a program for me. And so I was using what you would now call scripted find and replace, and I'd been doing that for more than 10 years. Oh, good. John Ingemels has told me that he's rolling on the floor laughing after about 5 minutes after my joke, but that's good. Right, so let's keep going as if there was somebody listening. Where was I? Yes. So I assumed that having used scripted find and replace for 10 years, this was normal practice. So around 2006, I started using Word for the first time ever, because in the Acorn fraternity, Microsoft was to us the devil incarnate, and none of us wanted to have anything to do with Microsoft software if we could possibly avoid it. So in 2006, I joined the Society for Proofreaders and Editors, SFEP, and started to learn to use Word, and I needed a scripted global find and replace. How would I make this a bit bigger? And expand it a bit, so maybe you can read it if you want to. So I needed a scripted find and replace, so I asked a friend from the Acorn fraternity who knew about Visual Basic, VBA, and he produced a macro for me, which I at that stage called pre-edit, which is basically the precursor to Fredit, but it was a text-only macro. So I entered SFEP and I tried to sell sell in inverted commas, because I wasn't charging for it, but I was trying to get people to use pre-edit. But at that stage, all those years ago, 13 years ago, on-screen editing itself was the latest new thing. Many of the editors were still doing editing on paper, and so the people in SFEP who were doing training courses were trying to encourage people to use computers instead of paper, and I came along trying to tell them, oh, you can do it with global find and replace, and that didn't go down too well. However, that macro was useful to me in that it gave me something to build on. I looked at how that macro was written and added extra features and more features and more features, and eventually it morphed into the thing we now know as Fredit, find and replace edit. And also I created a number of smaller macros from scratch, and it gradually built up. So that was about 13 years ago. So for those 13 years I've been developing macros for my own editing use. So the things I've wanted to do, I've produced macros for. And those macros, I've made them available as an electronic book. So there are 2 files that you can download from my website if you want to. So this session was billed as a question and answer session, and the question and answer is in the singular. So far I've had one question sent in, by Laura. Thank you, Laura. But it was a very special one because I think it's a generic question that a lot of people will be asking, and so Laura's question is going to form the basis of what I'm doing this evening. So let's have a look at Laura's questions. She did form two questions. So, I'm somewhat overwhelmed by the number of macros, and I suspect I'm not alone. You are definitely not alone, Laura. That's one of the main problems I've got, and the main problems that you guys have got is that there are far too many. How do I know where to start? Quite exactly. List of macros and brief descriptions helps, but it's a lot to wrap one's head around. Quite so. For example, Perfect It walks you through a process and you have the option of skipping steps that you don't want or need. I've tried some of the other Word plugins, but they are too packaged. Often they cause more problems than they solve. Your macros are wonderful a la carte. However, I'm still trying to develop an ideal workflow as to which macros to run in what order. Since you're an editor, I'm directing these questions at you regarding what you do, but I'm really looking for your recommendations. So my questions are: when starting a project, what are the first 5 macros you run before diving into manual editing? And she said below, or more relevant number. What are the 5 macros? I can't resist sort of throwing in odd macros that I just used number to text there to change the 5 into the word 5. Sorry, what are the 5 macros you make sure to run after manual editing before calling it done? Okay, well, good questions, and so that's what I'm working on. I was particularly excited by those questions because in the last couple of days I have been doing some quite hard thinking about this very problem. How do we get people to understand what's available and how to use it and so on? Particularly last Saturday I did another training session for some local editors here in Norwich, UK, and one of the questions was how do you do you need to use Perfect It as well as macros? So that got me thinking about this problem of how do people know what to do. I'm working on a long-term solution as a sort of an overall answer to that question, but what I can share at the moment is where I've got to at the moment. How are we doing? Is there anybody there? Well, it says there are 3 people watching now. Okay, that's good. So it's John, Laura and somebody else. Hello, somebody else. Right. Okay, what I've done so far in trying to get across what's available has been mainly focused on the macros themselves. So what I've done is saying, well, look, I've got these macros and I've tried to describe them and explain what they are. So I've likened that to being an ice cream seller. I've got a whole lot of ice creams that people might like, and I'm trying to offer them as something for you to enjoy. Okay, it might be better to try to be more task oriented, which was my kind of next stage in thinking. Asking the question, what jobs are you trying to do? So I'm a bit like an odd job man, or I'm selling an odd job man, a set of macros that can solve the problem of doing individual jobs. So what I want to move towards is the idea of being more project orientated, and so I'm asking the question more, if you're an editor, what is your overall goal? So if we start there and work out what are you trying to do, then we can start saying, well, okay, can macros help in that overall aim, that overall goal? So this is more like being a systems designer. So you're looking at the whole system and saying, how can computer programs, macros, how can they help in the overall system? But of course, any system designer knows that when you start looking at the system and trying to computerize things, you start with from a manual system and try to computerize some of the bits of it. And the system designer is going to produce some systems, but then when you start to use those, then the whole question comes as, well, how do they match up and where do they fit in? And couldn't we kind of rethink the way we do things differently with the computer programs? So that then goes back again, and you can then say, well, okay, if the users are prepared to change their way of working to some extent, then maybe the systems we provide, the macros we provide, could be better fitted into that new way of working, a different way of working. So that's my thinking at the moment. Some sort of I reckon I need some sort of conceptual framework to say, how can an editor use the computer tools, the computer macros in the overall thing. I'm just saying it's a holistic view. Yes, I was saying that this was prompted by the what people have been asking me at most of the trainings I've done. Someone's asked me the question about Perfectit and macros and how they work together, and I have been talking to Daniel Newman a bit about Perfectit just by email, not great deep conversations. And I've started the thread in the discussion forum on SFEP. So I'm working on it. So I'm saying watch this space. I'll try and come up with something. Let me just look across. Oh, we're down to 2 people now. I don't know whether this is a complete waste of time or whether I should keep going. Anyway, so at this point I say to you, any questions? Have you got any questions on what I've said so far? Probably not, so I'll move on. Okay, so given that I want to do something longer term in terms of, I mean, what I'd really like is someone to do, it sounds a bit over the top really, but I'd like someone to do a master's thesis or a PhD thesis looking at the whole area of using computers for editing, and there's a huge possibility there, but obviously it's not something I'm going to do because I'm too busy trying to keep up with all the macros. I mean, I generated 2 new macros today for people who are asking for things, so I just get on with it. Right, okay, so yeah, so what I've got, my book, what have I got to offer Laura today? My book has got various bits, so if I load it up, which is done by computer of course, when I click the right one, it loads up my my book there, and don't need the macros, just need the main file of text. I'm saying I've got my favorite macros section, so that's in the beginning here somewhere, my 12 favorite macros. Let's try that one. There we go. So if I wind this up a bit, so that's one sort of offering I've got within the book, is a suggestion of what, I mean, this was written ages ago, what at that stage my favorite macros were, so that might help. And then there's one there about if you're just doing proofreading, you can still use macros, so those are the ones that were particularly relevant to that. But then I've also got in there a section where I sort of present the sequence of, so this does perhaps answer Laura's question a bit more as to what the particular things I do are, but actually those are really before I start reading. None of that refers to what I do once I get to the end. Oh, sorry, that was proofreading, and then there's rather more that you can do for editing, but that's in the book, so if you're interested in that, you can go and have a read of that at some stage. What we've also got is, if I use my macro smart finder, if I type that means go to macro menus, so it just searches for the beginning of that. So again in the book we've got this macro menu which again I think Laura was suggesting that she'd seen, which tries to look at the different areas of work, like handling bookmarks, handling comments, and analysing documents, dealing with fields, figures, files, formatting. This is obviously alphabetic, isn't it? Global changes. No, not quite. So I've tried to give a brief one-liner as to what each of these does, but it's just hundreds and hundreds of lines of all these different macros, which isn't over helpful in some ways. Yeah, so those were the bits that my book could offer. I'll keep going as if there was somebody listening, because this is also, I hope, says he, being recorded by YouTube, so someone could then watch this later when they get a chance. And I can also get an idea of, is that being over 21 minutes? Good gracious. What are we doing here? Towards a new conceptual framework. Okay, in the training sessions I've done, what I've tried to do is to say, well, I've analysed it a bit. I've divided the macros into 3 types of macros. I've said that there are analysis macros, there are topical or line editing macros, and then there are those which are for global change. So I was going to go through these a bit in detail, but I think I'll not bother. I think I'll just gloss over that now, and then oh, actually that should have been Beverly, shouldn't it? In other words, what the different ones do. Docker lies about spelling and punctuation. Proper noun lies will spot differences such as different spellings of Beverly. Is that 2 people or the same person misspelt? Full name lies actually does 2-word or 3-word names and compares those. Hyphenalize, so it's 1 word, 2 words, hyphenated or dash separated, n dash separated. A new one is word parallelize, which someone asked about recently. So if it's not hyphenated, then it won't come up with hyphenalize. So if you've got a word which only appears as 2 words or 1, then word parallelize will it takes a while to run, but it will pick those up and tell you how often they occur. Spelling error lister is a sort of analysis program. It generates an alphabetical list of all the what word spelling checker thinks are spelling errors. And another relatively new one is capitalize, which spots proper noun words which are sometimes like proper nouns with a capital, initial capital, and other times are not. Okay, then the topical ones where you have things like running macros that swap words round, macros that swap characters round, and then multi-switch, which does things like switching that to which, was to were, continuous to that sort of thing. So there are macros that you would use while you are editing, while you're actually reading, and then the overall the global change type macros, Fredit being the most obvious, the most powerful, but definitely not safe. And I would say to people, only use these sorts of global macros before you actually read the text, not afterwards. And then obviously we can add to that things that would check your text afterwards. So at that point, things like Perfectit would be extremely useful for checking if you've caught all of the inconsistencies, the inconsistencies that were revealed by the analysis, and then Perfectit or running the analysis macros again will enable you to check yourself as to whether you've caught all the changes. So those are some of the tools, and I'm saying watch this space for the conceptual framework that may come in due course of time. Feel free to email me any ideas that you might have, and there's the phone ringing. That's a shame. I hope my wife will answer that. Or if you think you can help me with my job of looking at the conceptual work of an editor, then do get in touch. Oh, please answer the phone. Oh, she has. Good. Sorry about that. Anyway, that's me. That's my time to stop. I am your obsessive compulsive problem solver, Paul Beverley. Okay, thanks for watching and bye for now.